Hello, my name is Henry Keen. We are UATV English. Today we talk about a thing that helps Russian war effort and chest oil, specifically shadow fleet. Like we all know that a terrible shadow fleet, it exists, right? But should we even care? Some say. I mean, let Russia trade, right? Says Orban, Fico, and other European leftovers, pardon my French. Let Russia trade. It's a free world where nothing is personal, all is just business. Come on. Human values is all good, but oil price is first. And so everybody knows that's how it goes. Shadow fleet of the Kremlin keeps on working, selling oil to the West, just by the way. We talked to someone today who might shed some light at least on literally burning question. What do we do about it? Jason Kirkpatrick, Head of Communications at Razom We Stand, ex-Vice Mayor of Arcata, California. Thank you so very much for joining us, sir.
Thanks for having me on today. I appreciate it.
Right. To begin with, I mean, to what extent you think has the shadow fleet, which is literally the aftermath of this war, has successfully replaced the traditional delivery of oil and byproducts of it through pre-war pipelines? What I mean in terms of physical delivery capacity, shadow fleet is what? Less effective, same effective, more effective even maybe?
Well, it's expensive. That's one thing that has to be said too. It's more expensive and Russia gets less profit from that. I think all of the viewers here are supporters of Ukraine on this issue. And so what we want to see is less and less money going to Russia. And using these shadow tankers is not as easy for Russia. There's not going to be as much profit. And I want to point out that sanctions have had some effect. And the more sanctions there are, the less money there is for Russia and its weapons. I want to point out that sanctions have not been enforced enough, and that's a problem. Also, the fact is that Europe and the US, Canada, UK, other entities that are sanctioning, they're not aligned completely on the sanctions that they do have. We know that about 200 tankers have been sanctioned. But there's different statistics. Some say that the shadow fleet is estimated now to be 848 ships. Others say it could be as high as 1,000. So we need to clamp down on this shadow fleet and all fossil fuel exports from Russia, including LNG as well.
Well, I know someone personally who says it's about 1,000 and he's a professional in that kind of thing. But we know that the list of vessels under these sanctions is different. I mean, in the United States, in Europe, in the UK, these are literally different vessels, different ships blacklisted in each country. So it's a mess. Why there is still no one united register of sorts, I don't know, is sanctioned Russian shadow fleet register of tankers? Is that even possible to create one?
It's possible. The problem is that it takes money and funding, and I think the European Union coming together with G7 nations would be a great place to do that. Of course, the political will to drive a lot of this has to come from the USA. That has not been reliable, to say the least, to be nice and friendly to the American administration. But I think this is a place where Europe could lead. So what is not always going to work is finding every one ship to sanction and then making a new sanctions package. What needs to happen is an overlying whole entire system where there's an agency that is set up possibly by the European Union. I would suggest the European Union, where they say, okay, we're going to look at this on an evolving basis, because as you know, Russia has done a really good job of evading sanctions, not completely, but too much. You know, every euro flowing to Russia's war machine is too much. Russia has also learned a lot, we know, from Iran. Iran has been successfully evading some sanctions since the 80s. We saw yesterday the leader of Iran in Moscow meeting Putin. So this is a place where not only they share expertise, military expertise and weapons and drones, and so Iran shares with Russia, but also sanctions evasion schemes. So what would solve this problem is if the European Union would lead together with other nations and they set up an agency where they constantly are monitoring and tracking, because with the satellite technology available to Europe and other places, they can find out where these ships are, where they're going. They can track which ships are going to Russia. So if I know that this is a problem that you've talked about in your show, and we've talked about if there's a ship that all of a sudden is bought by someone that's going to be helping Russia somehow, but it's under a different flag, it's under a different name, it's insured somewhere else, and the next day it lands in Russia,
Right.
there has to be an ongoing mechanism to be able to track that on a daily or hourly basis with modern technology, which can be done. And Europe needs to lead the way on this to stop the shadow fleet.
Well, it has to be, but it's just not happening for some strange reason. But I mean, let's talk about very concrete things like insurance, right? These sanctions, they should have been limiting also the ability of the Kremlin to insure these very concrete vessels of the shadow fleet. It should have been impossible to insure a sanctioned tanker. However, we all know Russia simply do not care. Well, I mean, completely. What happens to crews or tankers or the environment in case of oil spills out in the sea? So what we see here is a lesson to how our Western law work or doesn't work. If you go rogue enough, like Putin certainly does, you are just, what, unstoppable. Law can't get hold of you. Only force, maybe brutal force. Am I right here?
I know we you on this program like to talk about force. It's a war that has to be a central topic
Right.
for Ukrainians, I'm sure. Where I have influence and our organization has influence is especially at the European level. That's where we try to exert influence. And so I'm going to focus a bit on Europe and mechanisms that we can use to stop Russia's war machine being funded, especially with European money. So concretely about insurance, we can look at countries like Norway, Finland, Denmark. These are countries that are right around where these shadow fleet tankers are going. So a problem with insurance is sometimes if a Coast Guard checks a shadow fleet tanker, goes up to a captain and says, do you have insurance? They have papers, it says they have insurance.
Right.
Could be just a fax, it could be a photoshopped fax, and they don't currently have the ability to check this insurance. So that has to be changed so that the state security agencies, in this case, Coast Guards of Denmark or whoever, they should be able to go and check the insurance and then check that it's actually valid. Because we've heard, for example, a scam based in Norway where there was a Norwegian company involved. Sometimes these are shell companies issuing fake insurance certificates.
Well, sure.
So I don't know exactly the details, but maybe somebody pays 2,000 euros to get a fake insurance certificate from Norway. That should not be allowed, clearly. And Norway and other European countries can step up and ensure much stricter mechanisms to make sure that that oil doesn't flow and that cash doesn't flow to Putin's war machine.
I agree completely, but all right, let's talk about that. Like during a Russian shadow fleet tanker inspection recent by a patrol ship, a Russian fighter jet was scrambled to protect the vessel. So some say Russia is even looking for a pretext of sorts to start another international conflict over just one ship. And we should not be letting it have such a pretext and blah, 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 and so on. But then what else could be done? I mean, what happens next? What pressure tools do we have? I mean, again, fake insurance. All right, we figure out with a patrol ship figures out that this is a fake insurance. And what happens next? We say, no, bad boy. You shouldn't be doing that. What, we fine them for another $2,000? I mean, all right, we're not applying a force. What then? What the tools could be?
Well, we have some tools that are working to some effect. So the sanctions are cutting down that profit. So again, it's not a black and white question, but every billion euros less that goes to Putin is a good number of Iskander missiles less. Right. A good number less tanks pushing at the border at the front line in Ukraine. So some more things that they can do is Europe has to just stop buying LNG. Germany, who says it's the friend of Ukraine, whether it's the leader a few months ago or the newest leader, Merz, when he says he supports Ukraine, well, he has to stop buying Russian LNG gas.
Right.
There are different estimates that very, very roughly 5% of Germany's LNG gas is coming from Russia. It comes from tankers shipped to France or Belgium and then is piped to Germany, and there's billions going to Russia. So let me talk about some long-term solutions. We want short-term solutions. We don't get them quick enough after 3 years of war. We also have to start looking at long-term solutions. And the whole West, if we lump the West, Europe, USA together, we see it's since the 1970s that they have been subsidizing, using public money to subsidize petro dictators, whether it's in Iran.
Right.
At the time in 1974, 75, the global energy crisis was caused by Saudi Arabia, who was actually backing Israel in a war. It's really complicated, right? But I would say by 1974, 1975, when the Saudis and oil-producing countries put so much pressure on the U.S. and other nations with the oil embargo, the USA should have at that time started going towards clean energy.
Right.
Instead of subsidizing fossil fuels, they should have had self-made clean energy, solar, wind energy, and get off this international dependence on fossil fuels, which not only is funding war in Ukraine when the money goes to Russia, but it's killing us all, or killing many people in the term of climate change. Climate change is also costing billions. The people below, people in Central Africa, when there's a drought, they are starving to death. People on islands and island nations, they're worried about losing their entire islands. So we have this issue hanging together. We could have a win-win solution: support clean energy production, boosting up clean energy, reducing fossil fuel dependence on these petro dictators like Putin or nations like Iran. And that's the long-term solution that we need to have more. We know in Ukraine, specifically where Putin and Russia have been attacking the energy infrastructure, solar panels on hospital rooftops, solar panels on school rooftops have allowed a resilience, new resilience and energy security to come that wasn't there before sometimes.
Well, I mean, again, yes, of course, here are my both hands. I am for that with my both hands. Long-term solutions, of course, fossil fuels, yes, no, the lesser it is, the better it is. But do you believe, talking about that force, but do you believe that the petrol ship would have arrested Russian shadow fleet if it arrests a shadow fleet tanker? Do you believe the Russians will answer? The fighter jet would actually have assaulted that vessel?
I think there's political questions that need to be answered, right? So you mentioned an example when a ship had left Russia with a shadow fleet ship. I think it was off the coast of either Finland or Denmark. You mentioned this concrete case when Russian jets were basically escorting or flying down low over
exactly,
Coast Guard.
yes.
That's scary.
Yes.
Nobody wants to provoke a war, right? Nobody who's in the Coast Guard. However, when you get a little bit farther away, the English Channel, for example, it's a bit harder for Russia to fly a lot of jets through that area. I suggest there are other places where it'd be a bit easier to board a tanker ship.
Exactly.
In the future. They should be checking these insurance things. They should be checking for sanctions violations. Lots of other stricter policies could be made. And besides weaning ourselves off the fossil fuels, the Russian oil, the Russian LNG, there are many, many measures that we could implement, and the enforcement is a big problem. These things are not being enforced. So
Absolutely.
whether it's the U.S. administration or European nations, I know it's a problem that you've talked about. We need to get those leaders, we need to continue to pressure those leaders to look at the human cost that you're suffering in Ukraine. So when on your show, people tell these personal stories that I've heard, or when I hear stories from my colleagues that haven't slept for 3 nights or a week or worse, they've seen the worst bombings in Kiev that they've seen since the war started. And people have much more tragic stories in Ukraine. When Ukrainians, I don't want everything to land on Ukrainians. The global community must stand up and help more. But when Ukrainians also speak these stories and come out in a unified way and put pressure on these Western leaders, it can have more benefits. And I encourage Ukrainians to continue to speak out. I would do my part, and together I think we can make more pressure.
Yeah, I mean, I can, on behalf of 40 million Ukrainian nation, I can tell the story because my house was recently bombed and shelled and on fire, and I haven't slept for like 5 days. It is hard, but here I am. I know you can see the only half of me, but another half exists, for now at least. But what I'm talking about, what I'm advocating for is the first things first. I think we can be arresting illegal Russian tankers. I think we should be doing that. And then we should pressure the world and go off the fossil needle and everything. So the first, what I'm just saying, that the war is already on. And well, the people are dying here. Russia is killing children and every night. And the world is more like, it's already, a new norm that is happening. And we're talking about the fossil fuels and everything. But that should be the second thing done. The first thing done, the Russian tankers should be arrested. I don't believe, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I am wrong, and Russia is looking for a pretext, and it will open another front with the United Kingdom and United States, and Russian fighter jets will be flying in English Channel, which I personally don't believe at all that is going to happen. But you know what? That was a long story, but let's speculate. Say all vessels, Russian tankers, are included in one blacklist, sanctions list. It is possible to do anything like Russian shadow fleet is like trapped, okay? Let's speculate. It's happened. So I'm sorry, but what prevents Russia to sell all these outdated old tankers and just buy new old outdated tankers? And here we go again.
Yeah, well, they can do that. That's why I was saying we need an instrument or a system or an organization,
right.
possibly by the European Union, to keep track on that. I want to point out there are a couple of other solutions that we haven't yet got to. One is a lower price cap. So the G7 and other nations have set an oil price cap at $60 a barrel. That can come down to 20 or 25. That should be much lower. Russia should not be getting any profit. That would make a huge difference. And enforcement, we mentioned enforcement, that the G7, the European Union nations, other ones aren't enforcing enough of the existing sanctions. And I have a statistic here that if the G7 and friends would have made full enforcement of the oil price cap since the beginning of the war, that would have saved or stopped 39 billion euros from going to Russia. That would have capped 11% of their exports, I believe. But capping cutting off 39 billion just by enforcing what they've done already, that needs to be happening. It's a political weakness that's not getting this enforced. And I'm sure you all in Ukraine are much more tired of than I am of hearing political leaders say, we support Ukraine, but we just have to keep the pressure on. When I'm here in Berlin, there was a demonstration last week to pressure the government to stop any kind of like cooperation with Russian projects here. We just have to keep the pressure on and not give up.
Well, yeah, exactly. It's exactly what I mean. When someone is talking about how important it is to stand for Ukraine, I'm starting to lose patience and the whole understanding. What does it even mean to stand for Ukraine? Like stand up and that's it, and keep on talking. But all right, we're getting closer to the end of our interview. So once a Russian ship is blacklisted, sanctioned, I mean, is it possible even to, I don't know, whitewash it, to re-register somehow so it comes clean again? Because I know this is happening. It should be happening, obviously.
Yeah, they do it. They have shell companies and tax havens, all of these things. Unfortunately, sometimes with European support, I had this example of Norwegians making fake insurance papers. This is why, again, I think we really need this kind of systematic overview that's not just the European Union passing a new sanctions package every few months or England or so, but an official body with access to the latest satellite technology. Most tankers now, they have this GPS tracker on them. Some of these Russian shadow fleet ones turn off their trackers, especially when they're loading from ship to ship transfers. But if you mix this kind of tracking technology, these GPS trackers they use with satellite technology, so you can keep an eye on these trackers with AI, artificial intelligence. Ukraine has used it to its advantage very successfully in recent weeks. This technology can all come together and actually track these tankers basically in real time with the GPS and satellite technology, seeing where the ships are at ports. This technology exists and Europe just has to implement that. So again, that's the political will that's failing. We have to keep the pressure on.
Right. Well, my last question was, if that would be up to you, what would you do to resolve the issue and stop Russian shadow fleet? But you actually answered it, Jess. You said the official body will be good. The official body that would follow it, that will pressure the concrete people with the authority and the power isn't it? Maybe that is the answer. And the accountability, the responsibility for what is done and for what is not, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what could kill off the very concept of a shadow fleet, exactly. And another great thing that Ukraine has done a few months ago, I believe it was, is that Ukraine put out a much bigger list of what Ukraine wants sanctioned. So it's always easier to force a political decision to be made if someone else has actually done it before. So if the UK, Europe, EU, and the US are saying, oh, we're not sure what we should sanction, but Ukraine leads the way and says, well, here's 848 ships. So we've heard this one figure sometime, 848 ships. They all get sanctioned, and Ukraine says, here's the names of the captains, because they started checking the captains.
Here we go.
Here's the names of the insurance companies, and that would have to be updated. But if Ukraine could help lead, I mean, Ukraine is stretched to its limits, I understand. But each one of these tankers that sends a shipment out, they're making tens of millions of dollars each time. So if Ukraine can help lead, maybe with support, financial support from Europe, to help determine what exactly should be the list of these tanker ships, or what the structure should look like, I think that would help pressure Europe in a much more effective way.
Jason, thank you. Thank you for your position, for your stance, for your time, for your expertise. Lovely talk again, as always. Thank you so very much. Hope to do it sometime again.
Thank you very much. Have a nice day, and much solidarity to all of you in Ukraine.
Likewise. Thank you. Goodbye. It was Jason Kirkpatrick, Head of Communications at Razom We Stand Fund and ex-Vice Mayor of Arcata, California. Thank you so very much for watching. We really appreciate your time, as it helps Ukraine to fight off criminal Russian aggression. Stay with us. Stay tuned. Goodbye.